My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old, and 3 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, I found out she had an entire life I knew nothing about. Not a secret hobby, not a hidden savings account. A house. A whole other house, with furniture, letters, photographs, and a name on the door that wasn't the one I grew up calling her. I found a key under her floorboard the day we were clearing out her home. No label. No explanation. Just an old brass key wrapped in a piece of cloth, tucked so deliberately it couldn't have been an accident. My mother told me to throw it away. My uncle said it was probably nothing, but my hands wouldn't let go of it. Before I tell you what that key unlocked, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? I read every single one, because what I found on the other side of that door changed everything I thought I knew about the woman who raised me. Let me take you back to the day it all started. It was a Tuesday. 3 weeks after we buried my grandmother, I went back to her house alone to pack up her bedroom. My mother had already taken the jewelry. My uncle had already taken the car. What was left was just furniture, old clothes, and silence. I started with the wardrobe, then the bedside table. Then I got to the far corner of the room, and one of the floorboards moved under my foot. Not creaked. Moved. I pressed it again. It shifted like something underneath was pushing back. I knelt down and pried it up with my fingers. Underneath, wrapped tightly in a square of dark cloth, was a key. Old. Brass. Small enough to fit in my palm. No tag. No note. Nothing written anywhere. I almost put it in the bin bag with everything else. My hand was over the bag, and then I stopped, because the cloth it was wrapped in, I recognized it. It was cut from the lining of her coat, the coat she wore every single day. She had wrapped this key herself, deliberately, and she had hidden it where only someone on their knees would ever find it. Everyone loved my grandmother. That was just the fact of her. She made tea for the neighbors. She remembered every birthday. She sat in the same chair at every family dinner and never once raised her voice. Her name was Dorothy. Dorothy Ellen Marsh. 79 years old. Widowed at 52. She lived in that house for 40 years and never once gave anyone a reason to question her. That's what I kept telling myself as I held that key. I went downstairs and looked at the photos on her mantelpiece. There she was, young, maybe mid-20s, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. No one else in the frame. No occasion written on the back. Just a date. 1967. I had never seen that photo before. I pulled open the drawer beneath it. Inside was a small bundle of letters held together with a rubber band. The handwriting on the front was in English. I couldn't read a single word. I flipped through them. 6 letters. All addressed to the same name. Not Dorothy. Not Dorothy Ellen. A different name entirely. I stood there in her living room, in her house surrounded by 40 years of her life, and realized I had no idea who she actually was. I tried every lock in the house that night. Front door. Back door. The old bureau in the hallway. The padlock on the garden shed. Nothing. The key was too small for the exterior doors and too specifically shaped for anything standard. I photographed it and sent the picture to my cousin. She said it looked like a cabinet key. It didn't. I knew it didn't. The next morning I drove to a locksmith on the high street. A small shop, the kind that's been there for 30 years. The man behind the counter picked it up, turned it over twice, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said it was hand-cut, not machine-made. He said keys like this were produced for specific locks ordered privately, usually for properties sometimes as far back as the 40s or 50s. He said whoever had this key had it made for one exact door. One door in the world. And then he looked at me and said something I wasn't ready for. He said keys like this were sometimes deliberately made with no duplicate. No copy on record. No locksmith trail. He said, and I remember his exact words, whoever owned this key did not want it found. I went back to the house the following day and went straight for the bureau. Bottom drawer. There was a tin box I had always assumed held old receipts. It did, but underneath the receipts was a folded document. A property deed. I opened it on the kitchen table. The address at the top was not this house. It was a street name I didn't recognize in a town called Ashford, 43 miles away. The deed was registered under the name Dorothy Vera Hollis. Not Marsh. Hollis. My grandmother's maiden name was Pierce. I had never heard Hollis in my life. I sat with that paper for a long time. Then I called my mother. I read her the name. There was a pause, the kind that lasts just a second too long. She said she didn't know what that was. I called my uncle the same evening. He said the same thing. Almost word for word. That night I searched the name Dorothy Vera Hollis in every public record I could find. A birth record came up. The birth year matched my grandmother's exactly. Same county, different name. She had not changed her name when she married my grandfather. She had changed it years before that. She had been someone else first, and nobody in my family had ever said a single word about it. I drove to Ashford on a Saturday morning. I told no one. I put the address from the deed into my phone and followed it to a residential street on the east side of town. Older houses, wide front gardens, the kind of street that hasn't changed much since the 60s. I slowed down when I got to the number on the deed. The house was still standing, detached, red brick. The garden had grown wild. Grass up to the windowsills, a rose bush completely unpruned, spreading across the front path like a wall. Every window was dark. The paint on the front door was cracked and lifting at the edges. Nobody had lived here for a long time. I got out of the car and walked to the gate. It opened. I stepped onto the path and got close enough to look through the front window. The curtains were half open. Inside I could see a sofa, a small table, a lamp still sitting on a side cabinet. Everything exactly where someone had left it. And then I looked at the mailbox fixed to the wall beside the door. The name slot still had a card in it. Handwritten. Faded but readable. It said Hollis. I took the key out of my pocket and put it in the lock. My hand was shaking. Not from fear. From the fact that I already knew. I turned it. One clean movement. The lock released. The door opened. The smell hit me first: old paper, dried wood, and something faintly floral. Not damp. Not rot. This house had been closed, not neglected. I stepped inside. The hallway floor was dusty, but the runner rug was still straight. A coat hook on the wall still had a single jacket hanging on it. I walked into the front room. The sofa cushions were still arranged. A cup and saucer sat on the small table, empty and clean, placed there on purpose. On the wall above the fireplace was a child's drawing. Crayon. A house, two figures, a sun in the corner. The kind every 7-year-old makes. Pinned up carefully. Not taped. Pinned. Like it mattered. I moved to the table by the window. There was a single sheet of paper on it. A letter half written. The pen was still beside it. I leaned down to read the first line. It started with the words, "I am sorry I could not explain this to you in person." I straightened up and looked around the room again. This was not a house someone had walked away from. Every single thing in it had been left exactly where it was meant to be found. There were 11 letters in total, stacked in a drawer beneath the half-written one on the table. All in the same handwriting. All signed with the same initial R. I couldn't read most of them, but 3 were written in English. I sat on the dusty floor of that front room and read every word. The first English letter was dated 1963. It was from a man asking her when she was coming back. Not asking. Begging. He used her name, not Dorothy. The other name. He said the boy was asking for her every morning. The boy. I read that line 4 times. The second letter was dated 1965. Same man. Shorter. He said he had waited. He said he couldn't wait any longer. He said he was taking the boy north and she should not try to contact them unless she was ready to stay. The third letter had no date. Just 2 sentences. He said the boy had stopped asking. I put the letters down on the floor in front of me. My grandmother had a child before my mother. A son. She had left him. Not because she wanted to. The half-written letter on the table was addressed to that boy. I picked it up again and read the second line. It said, "By the time you read this I will not be able to tell you myself." She had written it knowing she was dying. She never finished it. I drove home with the letters on the passenger seat. I didn't tell my mother. Not yet. I needed to know more before I handed this to anyone else. That night I sat at my kitchen table and went back through everything. The man's initial was R. The letters came from somewhere north. The second one mentioned a town called Harrogate. The boy had no name in any of the letters. Just the boy. I searched Dorothy Vera Hollis in the Harrogate birth records. Nothing came back. I tried Hollis alone. Still nothing. Then I searched our Hollis Harrogate 1960s and a marriage record appeared. Robert Hollis. Married 1959. 1 child registered. A son. Born 1961. Named Thomas. Thomas Hollis. I sat back in my chair. My grandmother had a son named Thomas. He would be in his early 60s now. He grew up without her. He spent his entire childhood asking where she was. And right now, tonight, he had no idea she had just died. He had no idea I existed. He had no idea that somewhere in a house in Ashford, there was a letter his mother started writing to him and never finished. I had a great-uncle. A living, breathing person connected to my grandmother by blood. And not one person in my family had ever once said his name out loud. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why would a woman keep this buried for 60 years? Why would she let a son grow up without her? Why would she build an entire second life and never once crack? I went back to the dates. Thomas was born in 1961. My grandmother would have been 23. She was not married to my grandfather yet. That marriage record showed 1964, 3 years after Thomas, which meant she had a child outside of marriage in early 1960s England. That was not a private matter back then. That was something families buried. Something neighbors talked about for years. Something that could cost a woman her job, her housing, her reputation, everything she had built or hoped to build. Robert had taken Thomas north. Maybe that was agreed. Maybe it wasn't. But my grandmother had stayed behind and started over. A new name, a new town, a new life. She had not done it carelessly. She had changed her name before she married my grandfather. She had made sure no record connected Dorothy Marsh to Dorothy Hollis. She had protected my mother, my uncle, the whole family, from something she believed would damage them if it ever surfaced. The silence was not cruelty. It was the only armor she knew how to make. And she had worn it every single day for the rest of her life. I registered on a DNA ancestry site that same week. I uploaded my profile and set it to search for close matches. Then I waited. 4 days passed. On the 5th day a match came back. 50% shared DNA. The system flagged it as a first-degree relative. The profile name was T. Hollis. No photo. Joined 3 years ago. He had been looking too. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I clicked the message button and typed 9 words. My name is Claire. I think we are family. I closed the laptop and didn't open it for 2 days. When I finally did, there was a reply. It was 4 lines long. He said his name was Thomas. He said he had been searching for his mother's family for 11 years. He said he had found a record of a Dorothy Hollis once, but the trail went cold. And then he asked one question. He asked if she was still alive. I typed back immediately. I told him she had passed away 3 weeks ago. I told him she had left something for him. I told him there was a house. He replied within minutes. Just 2 words. I know. I read that back 3 times. I know. Thomas Hollis already knew the house existed, which meant he had been closer to finding her than any of us ever realized. Thomas and I spoke on the phone 2 days later. He was 63 years old. He lived in Leeds. He had a daughter. He told me he had found the Ashford address through an old electoral roll record 7 years ago. He had driven there. Stood outside. He described the gate, the overgrown path, the cracked paint on the front door. Exactly as I had found it. He said he had stood at that door for 20 minutes with his hand on the gate. He never went in. He said he didn't feel he had the right. I asked him why he had never knocked. He went quiet. Then he said because the curtains moved. Someone was inside. Someone had seen him standing there. And they had not opened the door. I put my hand over my mouth. My grandmother had been in that house the day Thomas came. She had seen her son standing at her gate after 40 years. And she had stood behind that curtain and not moved. Not opened the door. Not called out his name. Thomas said he drove home and didn't go back. He assumed she didn't want to be found. He spent 7 more years believing that. But now I understood what had actually happened. She had frozen. Not from cruelty. Not from indifference. She had seen him and she had broken. And she had not known how to open that door after everything she had done to keep it closed. I drove back to Ashford the following Saturday. This time Thomas was in the passenger seat. We didn't talk much on the way. He held the letters in his lap, the ones I had photographed and printed for him. His hands didn't shake. He just looked at them quietly one by one the whole drive. We pulled up outside the house. He sat in the car for a moment looking at the gate. Then he got out. I unlocked the front door and stepped back. He walked in alone. I waited on the path. He was inside for almost 40 minutes. When he came out, he was holding the child's drawing from the wall. The crayon house. The 2 figures. The sun in the corner. He said it was his. He had made it when he was 6 years old. He said he remembered giving it to her. He had not known she kept it. He stood on that path and looked at it for a long time without speaking. On the drive home, he asked me one question. He asked why she had hidden the key under the floorboard specifically. Why not leave it with the solicitor? Why not post it? Why there? And I told him what I believed. My grandmother knew her house would be cleared by family. She knew I was the one who would go back alone. She had watched me grow up. She knew exactly how I moved through a room. She had placed that key where only I would find it because she needed it to be me. She could not open the door herself. So she left it for someone who could. Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. We both understood. She had spent 60 years unable to close the distance. In the end, she found the only way she knew. She put the key in the hands of someone young enough to not be afraid of what was on the other side. The house in Ashford is still standing. Thomas has a key now too. What happens next is up to him.